Hey, do you guys remember all those balloons that were being blown out of the sky not too long ago? It seemed like every other day something was being shot down. Well, so do I. Don't you want to see the footage that exists from that? We know it exists. Well, so do I. But guess what? None of us will, at least for now, because it's all classified. At least that's what they just told me. And the military doesn't want to let us see anything. Hey, everybody, this is John Greenwald Jr. from theblackvault.com. This story is pretty fun and intriguing to me, just simply because I didn't expect it. I was trying to get declassified or released for public consumption videos of the shootdowns of those different incidents that we know took place, that the military admits took place. They say they shot down these balloons, is how they're primarily described. I tried to get all of the footage or photos or whatever they would give me, but they turned it all down. They said that it was classified. They don't want to say or reveal anything. Now, just a refresher for you guys, the incidents that I'm referring to occurred on February 4th of this year in 2023 off the coast of South Carolina. That's the shoot down of the Chinese spy balloon that we heard the most about. But then more objects were shot down. February 10th over Alaska, February 11th over Yukon, and February 12th over Lake Huron. These were all heavily covered in the media, but obviously visual imagery to go along with it was pretty much non-existent. The question mark was why. If we're talking about just, oopsie, we shot down a balloon, it wasn't a Chinese spy craft this time, well then why can't we see it? Now, some may quickly argue that the heads-up display, the imagery, the metadata, whatever, causes videos like this to be classified. Ergo, they just won't release anything. So the object itself is not secret or sensitive, but rather that information. Well, I'm here to argue all that information can be stripped, blurred, or redacted while the object still remains in clear view. That is provable time and time again throughout decades of especially wartime footage being released by the Department of Defense with those redactions and with those blurs that allows that sensitive imagery to be sent out. Now, here's the actual denial letter. It goes through what I had requested, which again was all visual imagery of the shoot down of those balloons or unidentified aerial objects, which they referred to them as well. Kind of a safety net in case they didn't describe them as balloons internally. And I say I want the shoot down of the balloons, a little bit of a safety net so they know exactly what I'm referring to. I gave all the dates and locales that I already went over. And I was seeking all photos, videos, cockpit footage, personal cell phone videos that were taken by the pilots and given to the DoD, etc. All of that I was going after. Any and all that could be released, that's what I wanted, whether it be as it stood when I requested it, classified or unclassified. I wanted it reviewed for release. Their explanation was simply it was classified. The FOIA exemption for that is B1. You've heard me talk about that a lot on this channel. But more specifically, Executive Order 13526. They do two citations, one to Section 1.4C and 1.4E. Now, why is that relevant? Well, in a tweet that I put out to everybody, so you guys can see it, 1.4C, intelligence activities, including covert action, intelligence sources and methods, or cryptology. And then 1.4E is scientific, technological, or economic matters relating to national security. So when they want to exempt something and they feel it fits into that category, that's what they refer to as and put it as properly classified. So that's the explanation there. You can see the rest of the letter. Again, I won't go over it just for time reasons, but you can download it all. So now the biggest question for me is why can't they release it? I'll beat this dead horse quite a bit simply because we need to ask that question. If these are just regular balloons, then what is the issue for releasing that information? Now, here's a couple reminders for you guys that they have released some imagery, just not of the shoot down, but the question mark is why. These are amazing photos. If you haven't seen them, I published them on the Black Vault. They are officially released by the Department of Defense. This was the Chinese spy balloon, and they released all sorts of stages of this event, from the takeoff of the F-22 to the search for the wreckage, to the discovery of the wreckage, and then ultimately to my favorite pictures, because these are fantastic and highly detailed. You can see the wreckage itself that they're pulling from the ocean. So clearly, they're not afraid to show that debris, that balloon. And I would argue that this would likely be the most sensitive of all the events that took place in February, simply because this was a foreign adversary's spy platform, a spy piece of technology that we shot down. And yet here we are with some detailed photographs. Granted, they're not blueprints, they're more debris than anything, but clearly you can see how it's made, what the structure is, so on and so forth. So there's really nothing sensitive about this, right? So what's the difference between releasing these types of detailed images and that information that would be the imagery of the shoot down itself? I don't know. Again, given the caveat that you can blur and remove all that sensitive data, which does make sense that it would remain classified. Another thing that I want to remind you guys of is the spy balloon, the Chinese spy balloon that was shot down. Although it was first a leak, the Department of Defense later had no problem admitting that this was taken by them. Big shock. It wasn't fake, and this was of the Chinese balloon taken from the cockpit of a U-2 spy plane. So yet again, the DoD has no problem sending out these visual images from sensitive platforms like the U-2. Even though it's an old plane, there's still a lot that's classified behind it. Yet here we are, we've got photographs from the cockpit of it, seeing the balloon. What's the difference between this and shooting the sucker down? A missile that we all know about? You know, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, yet that's their argument. And lastly, although the MQ-9 didn't play a role that we know of anyway in these shoot-downs, this I wanted to bring up, just in case you haven't seen it. It's pretty cool. The Reaper drone had filmed the Su-27, the Russian aircraft that sprayed fuel all over the drone and then later kind of collided with it and brought the drone down. If you haven't seen the footage, it's pretty amazing. But why I'm bringing this up, because it seemingly is a bit unrelated, is that MQ-9 Reaper footage is inherently classified. In fact, I'll be doing more of a piece on this later, but I started researching a bit about the visual imagery on the MQ-9 just to kind of see how the imagery is treated from a classification standpoint, how it's released, and then here with this, how it was essentially fast-tracked, meaning that the military wasted no time in taking what we know as classified information and putting it out there. So this was something that proves even more when it comes to sensitive equipment, because the Reaper is highly classified. Many aspects are highly classified. Taking that sensitive footage taken by sensitive platforms and fast-tracking the release of it. Why won't they do it with the drones and the balloons that we know are of great, immense public interest? It makes absolutely no sense to me. I truly don't understand it. Now, I have filed an appeal. I am fighting it. I am looking for any releasable information. And should they release that, you know that I will bring it to you. But I wanted to at least do a short video on this and explain my intrigue behind their full denial of all of that material. Now, I have been asked this by a couple other people. If you really look at the nitty-gritty details of the request and the denial, yes, I was going after the imagery of the shoot down. Now, some have asked me, well, what about the imagery leading up to the shoot down? You know, were they spying on it? Was the U-2 there taking a bunch of photographs like we know it was of the Chinese spy balloon? And those are excellent questions. The reason why I differentiated the request, because I do have a second case for that, which is still open, is that I felt that the shoot down footage was specific enough to hopefully get a expedited request. But on top of that, get the information released. I didn't think that it would actually be classified. Again, with the exception of that maybe sensitive heads-up display graphics or metadata. But once that's removed, I felt that that would probably be the easiest. The reason I differentiated it again was for speed, but also some of that stuff where we have spy craft that's maybe, and I'm speculating here, taking photographs over US soil, flying wherever it may be, maybe that's a little bit more sensitive. Again, that's just speculation and a guess. It may not even be remotely true. But in the FOIA world, what I try and do is, when I can and where I can, separate requests like that for speed purposes, but also just kind of speculating a little bit on what may be a hindrance to processing the request and make it take longer. Doesn't mean I'm right or wrong, but I wanted to give you a little bit of the method to the madness there. So that second case that's looking for photos or videos of the objects prior to the shoot down, that was filed after this one that I just went over and is still being processed. Where that ends up, who knows? But you know I'll bring it to you when it finally comes to an end. That said, if you're watching on YouTube, please give a thumbs up. Make sure that you're subscribed to the channel and turn the notifications on. The biggest help of all. And I say this every video because it's true. Help spread the word about the channel if you feel the content is worthwhile. That is the biggest help that you can be to this channel. And thank you in advance for anybody who chooses to do so. That said, I'm looking forward to seeing you guys next time. I know that there's some fun stories coming up. And with that, this is John Greenwald Jr. signing off. And we will see you then.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me and other distinguished guests such as Ben Gimeno and Paige Moffett for today, which is the third in our series of historical lectures sponsored by the CIO in celebration of NRO's 50th anniversary. We hope you also mark your calendars and can attend some of the future lectures we have coming later this year on, have your pencils out, 31 March, 25 April, and 27 May. You all just remember that. This is the NRO after all. Also, I'm told I'm asked to remind you to please remove your badge, as I did, because this will be filmed. Corona. The name conjures the image of one of the pillars upon which our business is built. When the first film capsule was caught on August 19th, 1960, it began a revolution not only in collection, but in the use of sophisticated command and control systems in reconnaissance. Our guest today, Colonel Select David Arnold, will lift the veil on the forerunner of the systems we use today. Colonel Select Arnold is currently Deputy Chief, Strategy and Policy Division, DoD Executive Agents for Space Staff. Previously, he served as Deputy Commander, 821st Air Base Group, and Deputy Installation Commander at Thule Air Base in Greenland. Prior to that assignment, he commanded the 22nd Space Operations Squadron, where he was responsible for the operational direction of 8 worldwide remote tracking stations constituting the Air Force Satellite Control Network. The author of numerous articles and papers, including Spying of Space, Constructing America's Satellite Command and Control Networks. He is the recipient of the Gil Rob Wilson Award from the NRO for his writing on national defense. Outside government, he voluntarily edits a quarterly called Quest, The History of Spaceflight Quarterly. He is a certified command space professional with 173 ICBM combat crew alerts, over 300 Defense Support Program missions, and 2 overseas remote assignments. It is my pleasure to introduce Colonel David Arnold.
Sounds impressive. I'd like to meet that guy she just spoke about. He sounds impressive. Thank you all for having me this afternoon. It is really wonderful. As we like to say over at the Puzzle Palace, any day out of the Pentagon is a good day. So it's really nice to be out here in the sun and up here with the people who live above the earth, unlike those of us in the Pentagon. I got to tell you, though, that my first presentation that I ever gave as a historian was on a Sunday morning at a military history conference in Omaha, Nebraska. And it was to 6 people, 3 of whom were on the panel. So it really is satisfying for me to see so many folks turn out to hear what I'm going to talk about today, which is how to fly Corona. I'm, of course, not going to tell you how to fly Corona because we don't do that anymore, but I'm going to tell you about how they started flying Corona. You've all heard of Corona for sure. You've seen the bucket over in the visitor center, which I really enjoy seeing every time. But what I'm going to talk about today is how the guys who invented flying satellites did it by flying Corona. So let's see if I can get this to work. Ta-da, okay. On Discoverer 14's 17th orbit, a controller at the Kodiak Remote Tracking Station transmitted the eject command to the spacecraft. 300 miles above the Earth, explosive bolts fired and separated the film-carrying re-entry vehicle from the Agena vehicle, beginning the gold-plated bucket's fiery journey back to Earth. At 50,000 feet, the capsule's parachute opened and it began transmitting its automatic radio beacon. As the capsule's descent slowed to 1,600 feet per second, Air Force Captain Harold Mitchell and the crew of Pelican 9, a recovery-equipped C-119 flying boxcar like that one, caught up to the descending capsule in plenty of time. Mitchell passed over the parachute twice, each one closer to the water than before, and he was unable to snag the re-entry vehicle. But on the third pass, a slight tug on the controls of the C-119 told him he would go down in history as the first pilot to catch a falling star. Discoverer 14 included the first air-recovered film capsule and returned more imagery of the Soviet Union than the 24 previous U-2 flights combined. The Discoverer biomedical satellite program was the public cover story for the nation's highly covert Corona reconnaissance satellite program. And though the cover story faded away in the 1960s, the Corona program continued until the early 1970s. Operating satellites in the 1960s was the combination of innovation and inspiration with more than a dash of perspiration thrown in. That sounded better when I wrote it. Flying satellites then was very much like it is today. The biggest difference was they invented what we do today. This afternoon, I want to give you a glimpse into flying satellites in the very first days of space-based reconnaissance. Incidentally, this is the journal that I edit. That is the cover of an issue that we did last summer, which was basically dedicated to the 50 years of space-based reconnaissance. There's a really couple of nice pieces in there. In fact, one by our own on the Corona program, and a few others in there that are really nice. It's an issue devoted to the reconnaissance program. We don't normally do issues devoted to a single subject, but this particular one was a lot of fun. The interview is the interview that I did with Lieutenant General Forrest McCartney, former SMC commander, one of the first guys. I'll talk about him in a few minutes to fly satellites. And it was the interview that I did with him when I did my dissertation research back in the early 2000s. There we go. In the April 1960 edition of Air Force and Space Digest, General Charles Terhune, the new vice commander of the Air Force Ballistic Missile Division, talked about the last great frontier. He described the Sunnyvale-based 6594th Test Wing as the nation's first organization set up to exclusively launch, track, acquire, and recover a satellite program. A news release issued in October 1960 said nothing about Strategic Air Command or Air Defense Command. The news release described Project Samos as an R&D program to determine the capabilities for making observations of the Earth from satellites. And it made it clear that Vandenberg, Hawaii, and the Kodiak Tracking Station had primary responsibility for on-orbit telemetry tracking and commanding, while the Satellite Test Center at Sunnyvale received all the orbital data and exercised command and control over Samos. Also in the article, General Terhune described the Blue Suit operations in Sunnyvale. The goal of operations included direction to achieve at the earliest practical time the capability to operate and maintain with military personnel the
This episode of the Y-Files is brought to you by the Hecklefish Talking Plushie. Yes, that's a thing. In 1886, mining engineer John T. Reed was told the Paiute legend about a race of giants. Giants who, after a long and bloody war, were defeated by the natives near Lovelock Cave, Nevada. Reed's belief in this legend stirred great interest in the secrets held within Lovelock Cave. Official excavations were undertaken in both 1912 and 1924 by the University of California, with reports telling of thousands of artifacts being recovered. Of these artifacts, the most puzzling were human remains. Well, they were almost human. Skeletons measuring between 8 and 10 feet tall were said to be found during the dig. Skeletons belonging to who are now known as the Lovelock Giants. Legends of people of enormous size are told across a myriad of cultures, and despite what we've been told by mainstream science, there is evidence to suggest they really existed. The remains of giants have been found all over the US and all over the world. So why aren't these amazing finds on display in any museum, or taught in any classes, or mentioned in any history books? Well, it's because the existence of giants, for some reason, has been covered up. To say giants don't turn up in history books isn't exactly accurate. Many ancient cultures refer to giants. In Indian mythology or the Vedas, there was a time called the Satya Yuga, or the Golden Age, when all of humanity existed in complete harmony. Humans during this time were believed to be 32 feet tall. In the Old Testament, there are beings called the Nephilim, and they're mentioned in Genesis.
There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown.
One interpretation of this suggests that the sons of God were giant fallen angels who seduced human women, and their offspring were the Nephilim.
Well, how does a giant seduce a human woman? Oh, right.
Giants show up quite a bit in the Book of Enoch, one of the religious texts found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Nephilim were said to have been men of the old times, who existed before the Great Flood. Ancient Indian texts say the same thing. The Book of Samuel also introduces us to one of the most famous giants in history.
Andre?
Goliath.
Ah.
Goliath was a Philistine warrior who challenged the Israelites to send out a champion for single combat. David, armed only with a slingshot and faith in God, brought the giant down with a single stone. Goliath was said to be between 7 and 11 feet tall and possibly descended from a people known as the Anakites or the Anakim, and the Anakim were descended from the Nephilim. But references to giants in history go back even further. The ancient Sumerians had an equivalent to the Anakim, a race of gods who are sometimes described as giants.
Anunnaki!
Yep, the Anunnaki. And if you don't know who the Anunnaki are, here's a hint. Look in the mirror. According to interpretations of ancient Sumerian and Babylonian texts, the Anunnaki were a race of extraterrestrial beings from the planet Nibiru. Now, Nibiru is not some distant planet on the other side of the galaxy, but is right here in our own solar system. It passes near Earth every 3,600 years. And this extraplanet theory was dismissed as pseudoscience for many years, but it's now widely believed that there is an extraplanet or some kind of large object in the far reaches of our solar system. In fact, NASA has been searching for this object for years, though they call it Planet 9 or Planet X.
Oh, they can't give Zechariah Sitchin any credit, eh?
They won't admit that, but I bet it's a big part of it. In 2015, Caltech researchers thought they found evidence for this planet. And in 2016, they said they were almost sure the planet was out there. And then in 2017, researchers agreed that data and computer models prove with almost 100% certainty a large, secret, dark planet is lurking in the distant solar system. And they expect this to be confirmed within the next few years. And perhaps then we'll finally learn if this could actually be planet Nibiru, home of the Anunnaki. Now, according to the tablets, when the atmosphere on Nibiru started to deteriorate, the Anunnaki came to Earth for resources, specifically water and especially gold. And after their slaves rebelled, the Anunnaki needed a new workforce. And they performed genetic experiments on different Earth animals to try to create a new slave race. Eventually, they were successful. By splicing DNA from the Anunnaki, With cavemen called Homo erectus, a new species emerged, Homo sapiens. In Sumerian and Babylonian texts, this new species was called the first men, or Adamu, and the Hebrews translated this to be men of Adam.
Oh.
The first men were bred to work for the Anunnaki. The Hebrew word avad means work for. Avad also means worship. And so humans worshipped their gods, the Anunnaki, who were giants compared to puny humans. Though it was forbidden, some Anunnaki bred with humans, and their offspring became known as the Nephilim. Now, obviously, the story of the Anunnaki needs its own episode, so if you'd like to see that,
Yes, please.
if you'd like to see that, let me know. The tablets say the next time Nibiru passed near the inner solar system, it caused severe electromagnetic disturbances. Dark spots appeared on the sun, and waves of color streaked the sky. This is referring to extreme aurora borealis and australis, indicating a weakening of the Earth's magnetic field. With less protection from the sun's energy, the ice caps melted and a great flood swept across the entire planet. To escape the devastation, the Anunnaki boarded sky ships with their gold and returned to Nibiru. But on Earth, great cities were destroyed and sunk beneath the waves. When the waters finally receded, only a small number of humans were left to rebuild civilization. And this creation myth is told in almost every culture on Earth. And recently, we're starting to discover evidence that a great flood did indeed occur. But what about evidence of giants? Well, there is evidence, and some of that evidence has been found right here in our own backyard. Many Native American tribes tell of the long-forgotten existence of a race of humans that were much taller and stronger and sometimes more cruel than ordinary men. The Choctaw tribe has a legend about the Nahulo, a race of giants who ate human flesh. The Choctaw killed these giants whenever they could. Eventually, those giants were driven west. The Paiute settled in the Nevada desert thousands of years ago and passed down the story of a race of red-haired giants called the Sitka. And the Sitka literally means tule eaters, and tule is a strong type of reed found in swamps. Legend says the giants built rafts out of tule and arrived in Nevada thousands of years ago. But tule wasn't the only thing that the giants ate. Like the Nahulo, Sitka also ate humans. The Sitka waged war on the Paiute and all other neighboring tribes. The human tribes fought bravely, but the giants were too strong. The Sitka would often eat the people captured in battle. So after years of conflict, the tribes united, and that turned the tide of war. And in the final battle, the red-haired giants were driven into a cave. The tribes stuffed the cave entrance with sticks and brush and set it ablaze. The last remaining Sitka either suffocated or burned alive. Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins, daughter of Chief Winnemucca, was the first to write down and print the story of the Sitka, but she said this wasn't a legend, it was history. She even wore red hair taken from a giant woven into some of her clothes. When mining engineer John T. Reed heard the story in 1886, he asked to be taken to the cave, the final resting place of the Sitka giants. Reed wasn't able to finance the excavation of the cave at that time, but when valuable bat guano was discovered, people started digging.
Bat guano.
Yep, it was used to make gunpowder and explosives.
No, I mean, what is bat guano?
Oh, guano is the, waste of bats and birds.
You can make explosives out of
You can.
Okay. Do me a favor. When you clean my bowl, can you save it for me? 4th of July's coming up. I'm gonna make fireworks.
I'm not saving your I'm not saving that for fireworks.
Fine. Then to celebrate, I'll just light my farts.
You better not.
Why do you hate your country?
Lovelock Cave was excavated in 1912 and in 1924. And in 1929, the findings were published and they were surprising. Well, they weren't surprising to the Paiute. At the entrance to the cave, there was evidence of extreme scorching. At some point, a fire burned very hot and for a very long time. On one of the cave walls, an enormous handprint was found. Inside the cave, over 10,000 artifacts were recovered, including many human bones. Some of the bones showed that marrow had been removed, a sign of possible cannibalism. A sandal was found that would have fit someone who wore a size 29 shoe and would have been over 8 feet tall. And clothing was found that was too big to fit a normal-sized human. During the first dig, it was reported that the mummified remains of 2 giants were found, a female almost 7 feet tall and a male almost 9 feet tall, and both had red hair. In addition to the initial findings, even more evidence exists in Lovelock Cave and its surrounding area. According to a 1931 article published in a Nevada newspaper, 2 giant skeletons had been found buried in a dry lake bed close to Lovelock Cave, Nevada.
Were these giant gingers too?
Yep, they also had red hair. But giants weren't just found in the Nevada desert. They were found from coast to coast. Apparently, long before native tribes arrived, America was the land of the giants. In Peebles, Ohio, the Great Serpent Mound is a 1,370-foot-long prehistoric effigy mound. Nobody knows why it was built, but due to a nearby meteor impact crater, the area is full of gravitational and magnetic anomalies. Some researchers, like Richard Hamilton, believe the location for Serpent Mound was chosen specifically because of these anomalies. And for many years, there have been stories of freak weather patterns, UFO sightings, and strange lights in the area. And also found near Serpent Mound, the remains of giants. In 1872, a report appeared in the book Historical Collections of Noble County, Ohio. Someone had stumbled across enormous skeletons.
The remains of 3 skeletons were found whose size would indicate they measured in life at least 8 feet in height. The remarkable feature of these remains was they had double teeth in front, as well as in back of the mouth and in both upper and lower jaws. Upon exposure to the atmosphere, the skeletons crumbled back to Mother Earth.
In 1891, anthropologist Frederick Ward Putnam found large skeletons in the same area that measured 7 feet or taller, with skulls twice as thick as a human's. In 1894, a local farmer found unusual graves. The find was even covered by the New York Times.
Farmer Warren Cowan recently discovered several ancient graves a mile from the famous Serpent Mound, where Professor Putnam of Harvard made interesting discoveries. Upon opening one of the graves, a skeleton of upwards of 6 feet was brought to light. In another grave was the skeleton of a man equally large. It seems that the region was populated by a fairly intelligent people, and that the Serpent Mound was an object of worship.